Brint, in the years of your experience with Ryan, you no doubt have come into contact with lots of clients who've had a myriad of audit issues, and I'm sure certificates have come up. I mean, how does that rank in your experience with the different challenges that your clients face?
You know, unfortunately for many taxpayers, exemption and resale certificate management creates a parade of horribles that they have to deal with. And oftentimes it's a very routine process. It's kind of a low value, pushing paper exercise until it happens. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is when the auditors show up and the assessment comes in because all of these 20 or 30,000 certificates that you should have on file that the law requires you to have, you don't have them.
Right.
The end result is you're marching your way up to the CFO's office explaining a multi-million-dollar assessment. And worse, what's worse about that, Jayme, is it wasn't your liability to begin with. It was actually somebody else's liability, and because you didn't file the paperwork, you ended up making it your liability.
That's a great point. It's avoidable, right? So, but there are reasons that folks don't want to do it or they don't apply the requisite attention to it. I mean, I've heard things like, you know, there's an expense associated with that, you know, with software or outsourcing a service to somebody. What are your thoughts on that? Well,
you know, with every administrative requirement, there's a burden, right? And everybody knows that tax is one of the most heavily regulated areas, and there's lots of administrative burdens. This is one of them. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that in the modern world is completely avoidable. The reality is, though, a little bit of time and effort invested today can save your company a lot of money in the future. And with a tool like Control Point, not only are you avoiding this potential liability, but you're making your life a lot easier too, because it's more efficient. Mm-hmm. You know, it streamlines the administrative process. It makes sure all your certificates are up to date. It gives you the ability to communicate with customers and vendors in a very effective way. So nobody ever has time for everything. But right. Here's a way where you can leverage this important function and really take it off of that thing you lay awake at night worrying about, because so many of our clients we've seen over the years, they don't realize this is a problem until the auditor shows up.
Well, and I guess in the grand scheme of things, you know, when you weigh it, the types of nightmare scenarios you're describing probably far outweigh the cost of putting a system in a process or a process into place to avoid it.
That's absolutely right. But oftentimes the importance of that doesn't appear, the urgency of that problem doesn't manifest itself until the first assessment comes in. And then you realize, oh my goodness, there's a problem, and the time to invest is past.
Well, it's not always about investment too, right? I mean, sometimes we hear things from clients like, well, we're stretched super thin. You know, times are tight, we've got limited resources, taking on a new process or learning a new tool, not right now, later. We have to focus on these other things that are a priority for us. And I mean, any words of wisdom for a situation like that?
You know, that's one of the most exciting things about our business. You know, we go to our clients and we consult with them, and one of the things that we always tell them is use your resources wisely. And if you don't have the resources to do things like compliance and exemption certificate management and abandoned and unclaimed property, outsource those things. Right. You know, take those low value items off your plate, find a qualified service provider like Ryan, and let us manage that for you. That gives you the ability to reassign your people to higher level tasks where there's real value that's being created in your tax function. And what Control Point does is it brings the ability for not only the client to operate the software if they like, if they've got the resources to do it, that's great. But if they don't, we can take that same application and we can operate it on their behalf just like they would. So it's not a question, if you don't have the resources, we're happy to help in that regard. And frankly, the cost of that service and the cost of the software compared to the potential exposure that you're avoiding, well, it's rounding error.
That's a great point. And then, you know, we've also heard things like, hey, we're interested in doing that. So it's not a investment problem. It's not that we don't have the resources, but it may be that, you know, look, we turn over our resources a lot, and learning new applications can be kind of a challenge, right? We don't want to have to read telephone books and train people and hire people to come on site and, you know, get us started with new resources. But not so much an issue here, right?
You know, that's the beauty of the new design. That's the beauty of modern Control Point. Because let's face it, Most software applications, frankly, they're not going to win any awards for being intuitive.
Right.
You know, the vendors tell you that they're intuitive, but then when you get into it, you have to have an encyclopedia-sized manual to figure out how to do it.
Right.
We began this development with the idea we're going to make this simple, intuitive. Anybody can jump into it and start operating the software and be effective with it right out of the gate. And I think we've really accomplished that, and frankly, that's the biggest single value that Control Point brings to this management of exemption and resale certificates.
I'm glad that you touched on both sides of that, because a lot of folks think, well, this is always customer side certificates that we're dealing with, and true enough that this is not the tax that you have to pay. You could avoid this if you collected the materials and so forth. But there's a whole nother side to it where you have to spend time and money and resources and focus them on getting certificates out to your vendors. But this application does both. I mean, have you heard a lot of demand for that? Do you have sort of war stories about clients that spend a lot of time in that process?
You know, Jayme, I don't think in the last 30 years that I've been involved in a tax recovery project that didn't involve errors where the taxpayer forgot to issue those certificates. And guess what happens? If you don't issue that certificate, the tax bill comes, and if you don't have somebody paying attention to that, you overpay the tax. You know, we built a pretty nice business around going in and fixing those errors. So this gives you an opportunity to avoid that out of the gate, so that the next time you have an audit, your assessment's lower, your recovery's also lower. So you're really improving your process, and that's one of the great things that Control Point does. It does both sides of that equation.